I had a bad feeling about my own house long before I could prove it. So on a Tuesday morning in October, I kissed my daughter on the cheek, loaded my suitcase into a taxi, and told my son-in-law I was heading to a wellness retreat in Muskoka for 2 weeks. I had never felt more alert in my life. The taxi didn't go north. It drove 6 blocks east and stopped in front of a budget motel on Spears Road that I had booked under my late wife's maiden name. Room 14. Thin curtains, a heating unit that smelled of old cigarettes, and a window that faced directly down the length of my street. I could see my own front porch from that window. I sat down in the plastic chair, opened the zipper on my carry-on, and removed the small pair of Nikon field glasses I'd carried since my surveying days. I was 63 years old, a retired chartered accountant who had spent 4 decades reading numbers that didn't add up. And the numbers in my own home had stopped adding up months ago. 3 days before I left, my neighbor Margaret had grabbed my arm in the driveway. She was 71, sharp as a tack, and had lived on our street since the Trudeau years, the first one. She looked both ways like she was crossing a highway, pulled me close, and said something that I turned over in my mind every hour since. She said, "Gerald, I need you to look at your garbage before they collect it Thursday." Then she walked inside and closed her door without another word. I didn't sleep that night. My name is Gerald Marsh. I am 63 years old, and for the past 4 months, I have been disappearing inside my own body. My hands shake at the breakfast table. I lose whole conversations mid-sentence. Last month, I walked into the kitchen at 2 in the morning and couldn't remember why. My doctor, a man my son-in-law had recommended enthusiastically, told me it was early-onset vascular dementia, consistent with my age and stress levels. He said I needed full-time care. He said I needed to think seriously about the future of the house. The house. A 4-bedroom detached in Oakville, on a street lined with silver maples, worth somewhere north of $1.8 million in today's market. My father bought the lot in 1971 for $32,000 and built the foundation himself on weekends. I grew up inside those walls. I raised my daughter Claire inside those walls. When my wife Patricia died 4 years ago, I sat on the porch of that house every night for 6 months because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the last place that still smelled like her. My son-in-law Claire's husband had started calling it the property about a year ago, not the house. The property, I noticed that. His name is Trevor. He was 41, athletic, good-looking in the way that certain men are when they have never had to earn anything. He had what he called a boutique financial advisory practice, which as far as I could tell meant he had business cards and a leased Audi but no registered clients. He moved into my house with Claire 18 months ago when their condo downtown was between sales. The condo had been sold. There was no new one coming. For the first 6 months, Trevor was charming. He shoveled the driveway without being asked. He called me by my first name in a way that felt easy, not disrespectful. He took a genuine interest in my RRSP portfolio and my pension structure. Asking smart questions that I now understood were reconnaissance. He was mapping the territory before the invasion. The dizziness started in July. I assumed it was the heat. By September, it was a permanent fog, a gauze wrapped around my thoughts that made simple arithmetic feel like wading through wet cement. I, who had spent 40 years catching discrepancies in corporate tax filings by feel alone, could not balance my own checkbook. Margaret's warning about the garbage was the thread that began to unravel everything. On Wednesday evening, I waited until Trevor and Claire were watching television, and I went to the blue bin in the side alley. I dug past the coffee grounds and the takeout containers until I found what she must have seen from her kitchen window. A small amber prescription bottle with the label peeled off. The glue residue was fresh. The bottle still had a faint chemical smell I recognized from Patricia's final month's lorazepam. A benzodiazepine. At low, chronic doses, it causes exactly what I had been experiencing: cognitive dulling, memory gaps, muscle tremor, and, in an older patient, a clinical presentation nearly indistinguishable from early dementia. I put the bottle in my jacket pocket and walked back inside. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap. I did not touch the coffee Trevor had already brewed for morning. That night I lay awake in the dark and thought about the appointment Trevor had booked on my behalf at a legal office downtown. He had told me it was to update my will. He had the paperwork ready, he said. He had already spoken to a solicitor. All I needed to do was sign. When I asked to read the documents first, he smiled and said, "Dad, it's just standard estate planning. Patricia's been gone 4 years. It's time." The appointment was for 2 weeks from now. The Muskoka retreat was a fiction I invented to buy myself those exact 2 weeks. So I sat in room 14 of the Spears Road Motel, and I watched my house. I did not call the police. I want to explain that, because it is the first question every reasonable person asks. I am a black man in my 60s. Trevor is white, well-dressed, and carries himself with the particular confidence of someone who has never once worried that a room would assume the worst of him. The lorazepam bottle had no label and no provenance. My doctor, Trevor's golf contact, had already documented a diagnosis of cognitive decline. If I walked into a police station that morning, I would have been a confused elderly man contradicting the written opinion of his own physician while his son-in-law stood in my living room looking sympathetic. I had been an accountant long enough to know that the evidence has to be airtight before you go to the regulator. I needed more than a bottle from a garbage bin. I needed the whole file. On the second afternoon, Margaret appeared at the motel. I hadn't told her where I was, but she had known me for 30 years, and she knew how I thought. She brought a thermos of proper coffee and a Tupperware of her shortbread, and she sat across from me in the plastic chair and told me what she had seen over the past 2 months from her kitchen window. She had seen Trevor's business partner, a man she called the one with the silver truck, entering my house on weekday afternoons when I was at appointments, carrying a briefcase. She had seen a woman she didn't recognize photographing the interior through the front window on 3 separate occasions. She had seen Trevor in the driveway having a phone conversation that clearly upset him, glancing back at the house the entire time. "He isn't running a business, Gerald," she said, in the tone she used when she had already decided something. "He is running a clock." Margaret was not a warm woman in the conventional sense. She did not hug easily or say comforting things, but she was the most reliable person I had known since Patricia, which is exactly why I had trusted her without fully realizing it. When she left that evening, she pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. It was the name and cell number of her nephew, a man named Desmond who worked in cybersecurity and owed her, she said, a considerable favor. I texted Desmond at 9 that night. By 10 the next morning, he was in my motel room with a shoulder bag full of equipment that I chose not to ask too many questions about. While Trevor took Claire to her prenatal appointment, she was 4 months, along with my first grandchild, a fact that made everything happening in that house feel like a double violation. Desmond and I slipped into the back of the house through the garden gate. We were inside for 11 minutes. He placed 4 devices. One behind the thermostat in the hallway, one inside the false bottom of the dehumidifier in the basement, one in the kitchen near the island, and one in Trevor's home office that he had converted from the den where Patricia used to do her watercolors. He showed me the live feed on a tablet. The image quality was startling. I could read the label on a coffee mug from across the room. That night, sitting in room 14, I put on a pair of reading glasses and watched my house. At 7:15, Trevor came into the kitchen and made 2 cups of coffee. He stood with his back to the camera for approximately 20 seconds before placing both cups on the counter. I watched the motion of his shoulders carefully. He then turned, picked up both cups, and carried them to the table. He set one in front of the empty chair, where I always sat. The cup sat there for 20 minutes before he took it back and poured it down the drain. I had stopped eating or drinking anything in that house before I left. He didn't know that. He thought the fog was working. The following evening, the silver truck arrived. Trevor's partner was a man named Dale, mid-40s, a mortgage broker whose license had been suspended by FSRA, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, 18 months ago, a fact I confirmed with a 30-second search on the public registry, which is something any accountant knows how to do. They sat in the kitchen for 2 hours. I listened to everything through the audio feed on the tablet. The plan was not complicated, but it was efficient. Trevor had obtained, through his doctor contact, a sworn affidavit stating that I was in the early stages of cognitive decline and unable to manage my own financial affairs. He was in the process of filing an application for guardianship of property through the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, a legal mechanism that, if granted, gives a designated person full control over an incapacitated adult's financial assets. He planned to have me sign an enduring power of attorney at the downtown appointment, a document that, combined with the guardianship application, would give him the legal authority to liquidate my RRSP accounts, transfer the TFSA holdings, and, most importantly, trigger a home equity line of credit against the Oakville property. The HELOC had already been pre-approved. The bank had valued the house. The limit was $800,000. He's going to sign it? Dale asked. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him, Trevor said. He doesn't know what he's eating. He doesn't know what he's taking. He thinks he's losing his mind. And he trusts me. Because Claire trusts me. He paused. And because he's lonely, I sat in the dark motel room and I held perfectly still. After the HELOC clears, Trevor continued. We transfer him to the supportive living facility in Hamilton. The public one. Claire has already agreed. She doesn't want him to suffer. She just wants it to be over. I heard a chair scrape. I heard a beer can open. She know what's in the coffee? Dale asked. She knows he takes medication, Trevor said. She doesn't ask which kind. I set the tablet down on the nightstand. My daughter had watched me deteriorate for 4 months and had not asked a single question. I had walked her to kindergarten. I had sat in the emergency room with her at 3 a.m. when she was 19 and scared. I had danced with her at her wedding to this man, believing, completely, that she had chosen someone worthy of the trouble love requires. She knew he was medicating me. She had chosen not to know more than that. I did not cry. I had been an accountant for 4 decades. When the numbers tell you something you don't want to hear, you don't negotiate with the numbers. You document them. I called my old colleague Raymond the next morning. Raymond had retired 2 years before me from the same firm, a chartered professional accountant who had spent the last decade of his career specializing in forensic accounting and fraud detection. I had testified as a supporting expert witness in one of his cases. He owed me nothing, but we were the kind of friends who don't keep score. He drove from Hamilton in under an hour. He sat in room 14 and I showed him everything. The bottle, the audio recording, the public FSRA suspension on Dale, the pre-approval confirmation email Trevor had left visible on his unlocked laptop captured on camera by Desmond's device. Raymond was quiet for a long time. You know the enduring POA isn't worth anything if you're cognitively sound and can prove it, he said finally. I know. And the guardianship application requires a formal capacity assessment, not just a doctor's note. I know that too. He looked at me. So you need to let him think he has you. And you need to be in that office when he tries to use it. Yes, I said. But I need to do something first. Raymond and I drove to his solicitor's office in Burlington that afternoon. Her name was Dr. Anita Persaud, a Trinidadian woman in her late 50s who had built her entire practice on estate litigation. She was exacting, unhurried, and completely unimpressed by anything Trevor could theoretically throw at her. I had met her once at Raymond's retirement dinner and she had argued civil procedure with his brother-in-law for 45 minutes and won. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she turned to her computer and began to type. We are going to do 2 things tonight, she said. First, we file a statement of capacity with the assessor. I am going to refer you to Dr. Bakshi. She is an independent capacity assessor, not affiliated with any party in this matter, for a formal evaluation tomorrow morning. Her assessment will establish that you are completely cognitively capable of managing your own affairs and will serve as direct rebuttal to anything Trevor's physician has filed. And second, she said, we establish an alter ego trust. She said it the way accountants say things they find obvious. You transfer the Oakville property tonight into a trust of which you are both the settlor and the sole trustee. The trust does not appear on your personal asset register. Any power of attorney granted in your name applies to Gerald Marsh, the individual. It grants zero authority over the trust. She looked at me over her reading glasses. When your son-in-law arrives at that legal appointment with his documents, he will be attempting to encumber an asset that no longer belongs to you personally. The HELOC dies before it starts. Raymond leaned forward. What do you call the trust? She looked at me and waited. The Patricia Ann Marsh Trust, I said. She typed without comment. But I saw her jaw set in a way that told me she understood. We signed the transfer documents at 11:47 that night. The electronic filing confirmation came through at 12:03 in the morning. Raymond drove me back to the motel and we sat in the parking lot for a few minutes without speaking. You still have to go back in there tomorrow, he said. I know. They've been medicating you. Your system isn't fully clear. I haven't taken anything since Thursday. I've been flushing the coffee. He looked at me. You sure you want to do this yourself? We have enough for the police now. I had thought about this carefully. I had a recording of Trevor describing the plan in his own voice. I had the FSRA suspension on his partner. I had the capacity assessment in the morning to document my soundness. I had the trust transfer time-stamped, but I did not yet have the act itself. I did not have Trevor attempting to execute the fraud with my hand present. I needed him to walk into that appointment, believing he had already won. I needed the moment he tried to use the document so that the document itself became the evidence of the crime. I needed to be the last variable he hadn't accounted for. I walked back into my house the following morning, carrying a pharmacy bag containing blood pressure medication, my cover for the trip, and wearing the particular slow shuffle I had perfected over 6 days of observation. Trevor was at the island, eating toast. He looked up, and the color left his face so quickly it was almost clinical. Dad, he said, and I noticed how the word had always been weaponized, how he used it as punctuation when he needed me to feel manageable. You're back. Claire's just upstairs. I forgot my memory card, I said, my voice deliberately flat and tired. For the camera. I wanted to photograph the fall colors. I let my hands do a small, uncertain tremor. I set the pharmacy bag down and looked around the kitchen with the vague expression of a man reorienting himself. Is the coffee on? He relaxed. The shoulders dropped. The mask of concern settled back into place like a man returning to a role he had rehearsed. Of course, he said. Sit down, Dad. I'll get it. He turned to the counter. I watched the back of his shoulders for 20 seconds. I took the cup he offered and held it with both hands and let the steam rise toward my face. Thank you, I said. I set it on the table and did not drink it. The appointment was in 3 days. I spent those 3 days being the man Trevor needed me to be. I asked Claire to help me find my reading glasses, which I had deliberately placed in my coat pocket. I called Patricia's name once in the hallway loud enough for Trevor to hear, and then looked appropriately disoriented when Claire came to check on me. I let Trevor guide me through doorways with his hand on my elbow, and I did not pull away. Every evening I went to my room, locked the door, and reviewed Desmond's feed on the tablet, confirming that Trevor's confidence was building exactly as I needed it to. On the second evening, I heard him tell Claire that the appointment was just a formality, that I was further along than Dr. Hendry initially thought, and that they should start thinking about the Hamilton facility sooner rather than later. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Just make sure he's comfortable, Trevor. I don't want him to be scared. I sat on the edge of my bed with those words inside my chest like a stone. She was not a monster. That was the harder truth. She was a woman who had married a man who had slowly, surgically, separated her from her own judgment, who had replaced her instincts with his narrative, until she could no longer locate the border between what she believed and what he had taught her to believe. I had watched this happening for 2 years and called it adjusting to marriage because I wanted it to be something I could forgive easily. She knew enough to be complicit. She was afraid to know more. The difference between those two things is not nothing, but it is not enough. The morning of the appointment, Trevor dressed me. That is the only way to describe it. He laid out a pressed shirt and gray slacks on my bed and stood in the doorway while I put them on, making small, encouraging comments. He guided me down the stairs with his hand under my elbow. He helped me into the passenger seat of the Audi. The whole performance had the quality of a man transporting something fragile and valuable to a place where it could be processed. The legal office was a second-floor unit in a professional building near the Oakville GO station. The waiting room had the neutral palate and the aggressive calm of a place that handled difficult conversations for money. The receptionist brought us water. Trevor sat close to me, his hand resting near my arm but not touching it. The notary was a woman in her 50s named Miss Okonkwo. She had the deliberate precision of someone who had seen documents used as weapons before and did not intend to be complicit in it. She looked at me the way professionals look at someone when they are trying to determine whether the person is present. "Mr. Marsh," she said, setting the documents on the desk between us, "I'm going to review what you're signing today, and I want to make sure you understand each section. Is that all right?" "That would be fine," I said. My voice was flat and slow. Trevor's hand moved slightly on the armrest. She walked through the enduring power of attorney section by section. She was thorough. She paused at the property clause and looked directly at me. "This section authorizes the named attorney to make decisions regarding real estate holdings registered in your name. Do you understand that?" I let my eyes go slightly unfocused. I nodded once. Vague and cooperative. She glanced at Trevor. Trevor leaned slightly forward and used the low, patient voice he used when he was performing concern for an audience. "He understands. Miss Okonkwo, he and I have discussed this at length. He wants Claire and I to have this protection in place. It's what Patricia would have wanted." There it was. Patricia, deployed like a key. Miss Okonkwo set her pen down. "Mr. Marsh, is there anyone else you'd like present for this signing? A separate solicitor? A family friend?" Trevor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No," I said. And then I waited exactly 4 seconds, which is a very long time in a quiet room, and I sat up straight. The change was not dramatic. It was architectural. The way a building looks different the moment you understand which walls are load-bearing. I engaged the muscles in my back and squared my shoulders and lifted my head and looked at Miss Okonkwo with the eyes I had used for 40 years to read a balance sheet. Clear, level, and completely without fog. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to ask you to look at something first." I reached into the inner pocket of the gray blazer I had put on because Trevor asked me to, and I removed a folded document. I set it on the desk and smoothed it flat with the palm of my hand. It was the transfer confirmation for the Patricia Ann Marsh Trust. Timestamp 12:03 in the morning, 4 days ago. Registered with the Ontario Land Registry Office. Miss Okonkwo leaned forward to read it. Trevor went very still. "The property at this address," I said, "is no longer registered to me as an individual. It belongs to the trust. The power of attorney you've been asked to notarize authorizes the named attorney to act on behalf of Gerald Marsh, private individual. It gives him no standing whatsoever over a separate legal entity." I looked at her. "I believe that makes the collateral for the HELOC application non-existent." Miss Okonkwo sat back slowly. She looked at Trevor. Trevor's face did something I had never seen it do in 2 years. It lost its shape. The architecture of the performance, the concern, the patience, the devoted son-in-law collapsed in real time, leaving something underneath that was rawer and smaller. "What did you do?" he said. It was not a question. "I protected my wife's house," I said. "The way I should have done 18 months ago when you moved in. You." He stopped. His hand was flat on the desk. "You've been pretending. This whole time. You've been pretending. I've been an accountant for 40 years, Trevor. I've been pretending my entire career that numbers lie on their own." I stood up. My legs were steady. "They don't. People make them lie. And people always leave a trace." He came off his chair with a speed that surprised me. Miss Okonkwo made a sharp sound and stood. Trevor grabbed the front of my blazer with both hands, his face close to mine. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was the particular terror of a man who has just understood that the exit he has been walking toward for a year was always a wall. "You cannot do this to me," he said. and his voice cracked in a way that revealed exactly how young he really was underneath the performance. "You have no idea what I owe. You have no idea what happens to me if—" "Let go of me," I said. He didn't. Miss Okonkwo had already pressed something on her desk. Within 90 seconds, the building security officer was in the room. Within 4 minutes, a Halton Regional Police cruiser was in the parking lot below. Because Miss Okonkwo, as it turned out, had pressed a silent alarm the moment she saw the documents and understood the shape of what had been brought into her office. I gave my statement standing outside in the October air, with my blazer still twisted from Trevor's grip and the silver maples along the boulevard dropping their leaves in the cold wind. I was methodical. I gave them the audio recordings, the FSRA suspension documentation, the pharmacy bottle, the time-stamped capacity assessment Dr. Bakshi had completed 2 mornings ago, and the name of the physician who had filed a fraudulent affidavit at Trevor's direction. The officer, a woman not much older than Claire, listened to all of it without interrupting, and then said, "Mr. Marsh, do you have somewhere to stay tonight that isn't your current residence?" "Yes," I said. Raymond had already texted to say the guest room was made up. I don't know how long I sat in Raymond's kitchen that evening. His wife Paulette fed me curry and roti, and didn't ask questions that weren't hers to ask, which is its own form of love. Margaret called at 9 to say she had seen 2 police vehicles on the street and a light on in the house for several hours, and she was glad I was somewhere safe. I told her I was. What I remember most about that night is not the anger or the relief. It is the particular quiet of sitting in someone else's kitchen after the longest performance of your life is finally over, and feeling the ground solid under your feet again for the first time in months. Trevor was arrested and charged with fraud over $5,000, breach of trust, criminal negligence causing bodily harm, the lorazepam, documented by blood work done under Dr. Bakshi's referral, and conspiracy. The physician who had signed the fraudulent capacity affidavit surrendered his license and cooperated with the Crown's case before the arraignment was finished. Dale, the suspended mortgage broker, was charged separately. Claire was not arrested. The Crown determined that while she had knowledge of the medication, she had not administered it and had not participated in the financial scheme directly. She was interviewed twice as a Crown witness. I understand that both sessions were not easy for her. I did not contact her for 6 weeks. When I finally called, she answered on the first ring, which told me she had been waiting. We spoke for 40 minutes. I will not repeat everything that was said, because some of it belongs only to us. What I will say is that I am a father, and that does not stop being true because it is inconvenient. She was carrying my grandchild. She had been in a relationship with a man who had, by degrees, replaced her judgment with his own, and she had not found her way out until the floor gave way entirely. That is not an absolution. It is a context. She will spend years earning back what she permitted to be taken. I told her that directly, and she did not disagree. Trevor pled guilty to 3 of the charges in exchange for a sentencing recommendation. The judge in Brampton accepted the recommendation and added to it. He received 7 years at a federal institution, with a prohibition order barring him from acting in any fiduciary capacity, financial, legal, or medical upon release. The physician who had signed the fraudulent affidavit was referred to the CPSO for professional misconduct. When the judge read the sentence, Trevor looked at me from across the courtroom with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not the mask, not the performance, not the fear, just a blank exhaustion. The way a man looks when he finally stops running. I looked back at him and felt nothing I needed to carry. I sold the Oakville house in the spring. It was not a difficult decision. The walls held too many versions of my life, stacked on top of each other at angles that no longer made sense. The young couple who bought it had 2 children and a dog, and they asked me about the neighborhood with the specific anxious hope of people who are trying very hard to build something good. I told them the street flooded a bit in March, and the 3rd step on the back deck needed replacing, and the silver maples dropped their keys everywhere in October, and you would spend a full weekend in November just raking. I did not tell them about the other things. Let them have their beginning clean. With the proceeds from the sale, and the RRSP accounts Trevor had never reached, and the pension that Patricia and I had spent 20 years building between us. I bought a piece of land outside of Prince Edward County, 45 minutes east of Kingston, 3 acres on a ridge overlooking a long field that goes gold in August and white by November, and that I have not yet fully walked in every season. There is a small house on it that needs substantial work, which suits me because I have learned that the best use of a retired accountant's attention is a project with clear variables and a knowable end. Margaret is in the county too now. Her nephew Desmond found her a 2-bedroom on the Lake Road, a 10-minute drive from my ridge, and she has spent the past 3 months telling everyone in the Tuesday farmers market that she practically single-handedly dismantled a fraud ring, which is more accurate than it sounds. I see Claire on the first Sunday of every month. She moved to Kingston after the trial and started over in the way that people start over when they are 34 and have no choice but to be honest with themselves. My grandson was born in February. His name is Marcus, after my father, who built the foundation of a house that outlasted everything except what lived inside it. I held that boy in the hospital and I thought about foundations, what they require, how they fail, how the only thing that actually holds anything together, house or family or life, is not the material but the honesty of the joints. I spent 40 years reading numbers that other people had tried to make lie. I know what a forged line looks like. I know the difference between a document that carries real intent and one that is performing it. And I know now, in a way I did not fully know at 62, that the most important audits are not the ones the regulators ask for. They are the ones you do in your own house, at your own table, before the numbers get too far ahead of you. If you watched your own life being sold off piece by piece and said nothing, ask yourself why. The answer is in there somewhere, and it is worth finding. If someone in your house is managing your confusion more carefully than your well-being, that is not care. That is accounting. And it is time to check the books. Tell me in the comments, would you have given your daughter a second chance? I read every one.